numerous first-hand accounts from the Union soldiers who came through the state. I was amazed at how often they mentioned, we passed by this site today where Marion did this or Sumter did that. They even found some actual Revolutionary War uniforms in some houses. And I tell people, based on what I've read, I swear, I think those Union soldiers with Sherman's knew more about South Carolina and the American Revolution than the average South Carolinian does today.
You are listening to Historyman, the platform for historians, curators, and authors to tell their stories of the American Revolution, walk in the footsteps of heroes, and proclaim freedom reigns. On today's episode, we are again with Tom Elmore, the South Carolina State historian for the Ancient Order of Hiberniums. Today, I think our episode is going to be on the media surrounding Francis Marion over the years. And you've done some research on that, and I can't wait to hear it.
Okay, well, it all starts, Pierre Horry wanted to write a biography of Francis Marion, who was his friend and, comrade at arms. Well, he handed it to a guy named Parson Weems to rewrite because he thought Weems was a better writer and been successful. Weems also, we can remember, is the same guy who told us the story about Washington and the cherry tree. And he gave that same treatment to Horry's account. Horry read it, Weems wrote, and basically said, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, or some equivalent thereof. One of the big embellishments of it is the famous potato supper story, which never happened. Although that story has value because the famous painting of it is the only image of Marion ever painted by someone who ever actually saw or met Marion. The artist was 14 when he met Marion, and I've heard stories about a number of people who served under Marion thought it was a good likeness. My problem is he looks a little too young and too well-groomed and too clean-shaven for the kind of environment. But that was the one that kind of got going. Then I can't remember the guy's name, but one of Marion's men wrote a book that's rather dull, and the dates got some dates mixed up. And then you finally had William Gilmore Simms. That was the standard book. It came out before the Civil War. Simms reportedly had Horry's original manuscript and used it. And Simms' book was the standard book for almost a century. The problem with Simms is he is very long-winded. He takes a whole page to say, well, I would probably write in a paragraph or less. Now, Simms is also credited by some recent scholarship as the one who popularized the term swamp fox, because there's actually no evidence that Marion was ever called the swamp fox in his day, and there's nothing in the pension records of his men that mention it. Some suggest that maybe swamp fox was, sort of a derogatory term. However, I can't believe it was probably made up by none other than Parson Weems, who gave us a famous tale about how that as far as this damn old fox, the devil himself couldn't catch him, supposedly uttered by Ban Street Charlton. The question is, how would the Patriots hear about that word, if it was only said around his own men? So, yeah, I kind of lean to the theory that was an embellishment, but Simms made it popular. And then, oddly enough, no real scholarship in books. However, there was some movies and TVs. And around in 1912, 1914, there were 2 silent films made about Marion. Unfortunately, both are lost, so we have a good description of the 1914 film. And there's also a few stills. And one of the scenes that's kind of funny, looking at the still of that 14 film, is you see a Gadsden flag in the background, and everyone's wearing tricorn hats, which, of course, they never used to either. And yes, there's a love story. And then CBS did this Cavalcade of America, and Hans Conrad, who is best known as the voice of Snidely Whiplash and Bullwinkle, and Captain Hook in the Disney Peter Pan film, he did Marion. And I just cannot picture Francis Marion sounding like Snidely Whiplash. I actually have tried to ask some people, what did Marion sound like? If anyone wrote what his voice was like, and no one can find anything on that. My personal guess is probably maybe a light Cajun or Creole accent since he was of Huguenot descent, but and since he was a slight bill, he probably was a not that loud speaker. But then let's get to the meat and potatoes, and that is Uncle Walt, as in Walt Disney. And gotta get a little background on this. Okay, when Disney was building Disneyland, he needed money. I forget how much it would have cost, I mean, millions of dollars then, even more today. And so to help subsidize the cost, he came up with the Disneyland TV show, which was also a bit of an infomercial as well for what was going on with the park. And when it debuted, it was, number 6 in the ratings and was in the top 20 for the first 3 seasons, thanks in part to a guy with a coonskin cap named Davy Crockett. But then afterwards, it dropped out of the ratings, and ABC was really getting in panic. They wanted another Crockett, and also they wanted more westerns, because westerns were the light bulb of that channel at the time. And Disney, and this is a quote from him, I found myself in a straitjacket. I no longer had the freedom of action. They kept insisting I do more and more westerns, and my show became loaded with every western myth. So he turned to American history and decided to create a series on Francis Marion, The Swamp Fox. The book was originally going to be, the film series was going to be credited on the award-winning young adult book, The Swamp Fox Brigade, by Eric Lucas, pen name for Paul Greenberg. However, the author had come under the attention of the House Un-American Committee, or the McCarthy Committee. I don't know why. I've tried. I cannot find anything. So Disney was told pretty much don't use it. So he kept the guy on as Eric Scott, historical consultant. He was overpaid. But then to complicate things, in January 1959, with production underway, former university professor Dr. Robert D. Bass published Swamp Fox, The Life and Campaigns of General Francis Marion, which, to be fair, which I should state, became for decades, replaced Sims as the standard book of Marion. It's still one of my favorites. I got a copy for Christmas, and I still have it. I've read it I don't know how many times over the years. I really enjoyed it that much. And of course, Bass also wrote the biography of Sumter and Carleton as well, too. So, and his papers are at the University of South Carolina, which is where I got a lot of this material. So to avoid a lawsuit, Disney bought the rights to the book and created source material for the series. In a letter from Disney to Bass, the letter I just showed you, dated December 16, 1959, he acknowledged, quote, a great deal of research from Francis Marion, suggesting that they had looked at other materials, some of which embellished Marion's deeds in the series will reflect this influence, i.e. Sims and Weems. And to play Marion, they had Leslie Nielsen, at the time was best known for Tammy and the Bachelor and Forbidden Planet. At 6'1", 170 pounds, he was a foot taller than the 5'2", 110-pound Marion. Nielsen actually enjoyed making the series. He later said in an interview that was a great experience because the Disney people didn't do their shows like everyone else, knocking out episode a week. We only had to do an episode a month, and the budgets were extremely high for TV at that time. So we had location shooting rather than cheap studio backdrop and very authentic costumes. Well, let's talk about the studio backdrop. The backdrop for what was Charleston was the same outdoor set used for the Irish Village in Darby O'Gill and the Little People, and for colonial Los Angeles and Zorro. And in episode 8, when they actually do a horse stampede through Charleston, you see men in colonial uniforms chasing horses through adobe-looking villages, something that you would find in Mexico or California. As for the rest of the costumes, well, you had a bunch of Western actors who were, played. I mean, the director was Western. Disney tried to as a Western. Slim Pickens, veteran cowboy actor, was in there. Patrick McNee, who played, who was Sneed in the original Avengers TV show of the 60s, he was in it. The first 2 episodes, you had Joey Page playing Marion's fictitious love interest, Mary Bideau. For the record, Marion had no love interest. He married a cousin after the war who was probably more or less a glorified housekeeper. And Joy Page, in costume and makeup, looks a lot like Elsa from Frozen. and I can't help but wonder if that's not a coincidence. In the third episode, the role was taken over by Barbara Ayler, who was a brunette, as opposed to Paige's blonde. Anyway, and since Crockett was success was due to the theme song, they had one for Swamp Fox. Swamp Fox, tail on his hat. Nobody knows where the Swamp Fox at. Swamp Fox, hiding in the glen, runs away to fight again. Yeah. Anyway, tell about the authenticity of the costumes. First episode, they are shown wearing blue uniforms with buff trim and tricorn hats. The 2nd South Carolina Regiment wore blue coats with red trim and helmets with a crescent moon with Liberty in it. And you can buy a cap, like similar to that helmet from this guy right from the Historyman. Nice cap too, I have one. And then later in the episode, we see Marion in civilian clothes wearing a leather tricorn hat with a fox's tail on it and adorned with a crescent moon. Nielsen liked the hat, saying, quote, anyone wearing such a hat would feel rather brave. However, the real Marion always wore his colonial officer's uniform and helmet. In fact, one of the first things he did when he recaptured Georgetown is he went to the tailor shop and got a new uniform. And plus, more importantly, had been captured in cities, he would have been executed on the spot as a spy, and nobody would have said a word. Other historical inaccuracy. Sergeant Will Jasper is shown with Marion on the eve of the British capture of Charleston, although in reality he was dead 7 months before these events took place. Bass expressed concern about these discrepancies to Disney, in which he replied, in producing for vast television audiences, we are more or less compelled to take certain liberties and attempt to please them. However, we tried to be as factual as we could with respect to historical events and to this, and we did a great deal of research on Francis Marion. Needless to say, your book has been of much help to us. Yeah, another one too. There's an episode where he visits the widow Jackson and her son Andrew, or son Andy. The press release the press stuff is funny. The press release announced a successor of Davy Crockett's coonskin cap is in the offering. This time it's a 3-corn leather hat with foxtail, suitably inscribed "Liberty or Death." Move over, Davy. It looks like there'll be room for the Swamper too. I have yet to find anyone who has ever said they ever heard to Marion as the Swamper. Until I told them that. It called Marion the Scarlet Pimpernel of the South, while on-air previews called him the Robin Hood of the American Revolution. There are merchandise tie-ins, a board game, a coloring book, a Dale comic book. I actually have a copy of the comic book. And for 50 cents and 2 Canadian dry ball caps, you can own a Swamp Fox flintlock pistol. They even released the theme song as a single. The first episode debuted on ABC on Sunday, October 16, 1959. All episodes in Disney's introductions were filmed in color, but they aired in black and white. Another issue Disney had with ABC was they were the last network to go to color television. Of course, now, ironically, Disney owns ABC. So, take it as you will. 6 episodes aired in the 1959-60 season and 2 in the 60-61. But they failed to Walt Disney Presents, which is what's a new name for Disneyland, did not make the top 20 season. Though Disney has said that Swamp Fox might run for 10, it only ran for 8 without a real finale. But that was not the only problem. Disney, to Bass, it might interest you to know that after 2 of our Swamp Fox programs were shown in Canada, that portions of our television show was reluctantly canceled by the Canadian Broadcast Company. It was seen that pressure was brought on them to bear by a group of leftover Tories who didn't feel that Canadians should find out how the American Revolution came out. The Tories the Disney talking about was the Canadian government, who objected to villainous portrayals of British and Tory characters. Another Disney program, the Scarecrow Romney Marsh, was also a victim of that. The decision to ban the series on Canadian TV was a loss of income for Disney. And it was very ironic. Leslie Nielsen was a Canadian, and his brother Eric was in the Canadian Parliament and was a very influential of it. I would just love to have been at Christmas time at the Nielsen house with those two. All episodes of Swamp Fox aired during their initial run, but were seemingly forgotten until the 80s and the 90s when they were shown on the Disney Channel. To take advantage of Nielsen's newfound fame as a comedic actor, I'm sure a lot of people were shocked to see Nielsen with dark hair. as opposed to the silver and being serious. For the rebroadcast, the episodes had new opening titles and closing credits, while some scenes were edited out. In '05, Efego Baca and the Swamp Fox Legendary Heroes released as part of the Walt Disney Treasure DVD series. Baca is a real life person. He was a Hispanic lawman turned lawyer who was actually certified to practice argue cases before the U.S. Supreme Court, the first Mexican American to do so, though I don't think he ever did. He was also the subject of a 10-part series. 125,000 DVDs were made with the first 3 episodes of Swamp Fox and 3 different episodes, non-consecutive episodes of Baca. To date, there's been no official release of the entire series, nor has been on Disney Plus, nor has Baca for that matter. Hopefully, again, with the 250 coming up, we'll have it.
How do you spell Baca?
ELFEGOBACA.
Okay. Have you found any of those episodes?
I have, but I'd rather not say.
I got you.
But yeah, I'm hoping that with the 250 we might see them come up. Moving into the 70s, the Tricentennial Commission, when that is a story of itself, had a little booklet come out talking about the partisan leaders of the revolution. The Tricentennial Commission, I talk about 1970, South Carolina celebrated its 300th anniversary, and they had all kinds of grandiose plans for expos in Charleston, Columbia, and Greenville, and none of it exactly came out the way they intended to. But anyway, they printed a book out by someone who had never written a book about the American Revolution, and basically likened Marion, Sumter, and Pickens to Mao Zedong and Fidel Castro, and I'm sure a lot of the conservatives here in South Carolina, and Ho Chi Minh, and which probably went over like a ton of bricks with conservatives in the state. And then in another thing that happened in the 1970s, and since Loretta Swift passed away last week, we should mention there is a connection between Francis Marion and MASH. In one episode, one of the early episodes, is mentioned that Frank Burns' full name is Francis Marion Burns.
Well, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I found it interesting too. I just got a good chuckle out. In 1974, there was another biography that came out that was pretty good. Hugh Rankin wrote his. It's not a bad book. Very good facts, information, but kind of dry read. The Aller book, which came out a couple of years ago, John Aller, is by far and away the best biography of him. That was in 2000, I want to say maybe '08, but if you're going to read one book about him, Marion, that is the book to read. And then there was a couple.
Well, hold on. You didn't say which book it was.
Yeah, John Aller's book. I'm sorry, the title is The Swamp Fox, How Francis Marion Saved the American Revolution.
And the author's name is who again?
John Aller, Oller.
Okay.
And then there's a couple that came out about Snow Island and Marion's campaign and looked at the history of it. Stephen Smith, yeah. And he pretty much has dismissed the idea that, there's this mystique, thanks to Sims and Weems, that Snow Island was like the Bat Cave or Sherwood Forest where, Marion's men would pop out, fight for justice and pop back in, and pretty much said there's zero evidence of it. What more likely happened is they found camps around the area, and so they probably said Snow Island. Like if someone lived in Burbank, California, they might say I live in LA or I live in Hollywood, that same kind of thing here. I mean, I live close to Irmo, but I tend to say I live in Columbia, so that was that. There's one other thing too, a certain film featuring Mel Gibson. I am not allowed to discuss that film by my wife, and this is not a joke, because she is afraid of what it would give me a heart attack, and I might do damage to people, objects, pets, and anything else I could get my hand on. Yes, my face came about when I came home from watching it. My face was about as red as a Carolina football jersey.
So they took too many liberties in that movie for you, huh?
Oh, bad pun. Well, let's put it this way. Having grown, living near Camden and visiting that site a lot, especially in the last couple of years, having lived near Cowpens, my family's from Gaffney. Like remember the famous quote, I knew John F. Kennedy and I knew JFK, you're no JFK. Same logic.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, but it's great for Hollywood, and it's great to get get it out there for everybody to consume from a liberty standpoint. But I
You know,
understand where you're coming from.
there was a movie called Sweet Liberty with Alan Alda, speaking of MASH, on which he played a history professor who was a consultant for a movie that, let's say, was probably about historically accurate as a Patriot. And so, and they, at the end of the film, they do their own version of the Battle of Cowpens, on which everyone takes off their clothes.
That's taking some creative liberty on that one, isn't it?
Well, actually, in this case, it was more of a protest, but so I can live with that. That one I can live.
That is hilarious.
Oh yeah, as I said, the Disney series. I mean, I told someone, I said the Disney was to history what Cena was to Greek mythology.
Well, it's interesting that of all the heroes in South Carolina, Francis Marion certainly stands out, and it stands out in many reasons, or for many reasons, because of that Walt Disney show. The printed books over the years, that's one thing, but that only reaches a certain audience who likes to read that historical work, that type of literary or genre. But when it got on to Walt Disney and he put it on the big screen, that reached all walks of life in every part of the world. So that's why it kind of stuck out in the minds of people.
One of the things that struck me is when I wrote my magnum opus, Carnival of Destruction, Sherman's Invasion of South Carolina, which I spent 15 years researching. When I read numerous first-hand accounts from the Union soldiers who came through the state, I was amazed at how often they mentioned, we passed by this site today where Marion did this or Sumter did that. They even found some actual Revolutionary War uniforms in some houses. And I tell people, based on what I read, I swear, I think those Union soldiers with Sherman's knew more about South Carolina and the American Revolution than the average South Carolinian does today. I mean, it was just amazing how I was so impressed by how much they knew.
It is interesting to me when you go back and you look at the area around where the Over the Mountain men were from Abington, Virginia, prior to the Civil War, the War of Northern Aggression, as we like to call it down here in the South. They would get together on the old muster fields, and the old veterans of Kings Mountain would recall how they approached that battle and how they fought in that battle, and to all those young boys that were going off to war for the Confederacy. So I can certainly see where that might have happened when the Union soldiers came down here.
The only figure of the American Revolution that had more towns and counties named after Marion, was George Washington. There's about 21 towns and counties named after Marion. The Tabby Fort there in St. Augustine for a while, it was called Fort Marion. So, yeah, I mean, he was definitely, people definitely knew, honored him, recognized him. You see there was a couple of references to Marion in some of the flags, from South Carolina in the war between the states, as some like to call it. And of course, the South Carolina National Guard, they call it the Smallpox Squadron. So
the Air National Guard down at McIntyre.
Yeah. His legacy lives on. I mean, so yeah, I've always admired Mary. He's always been. I remember one of my earliest memories is my parents took me to the old Charleston Museum that was near the Ashley River, and there was a diorama of Francis Marion. And that's where I learned about Marion, and somehow it's just something clicked with me that's stayed with me ever since.
He's a great hero of the state. He's a great hero of the South Carolina State Guard, as a matter of fact. Yeah, I appreciate your research. How would people get a hold of you, Tom?
Well, I'm on Facebook. Just look me up, Tom Elmore, Elmore, and I do a PowerPoint about the Disney Swamp Block show specifically, and then I also do one that features all the different books, TV shows, etc. that have been written about Marion over the years and all that. I'm also on the South Carolina Humanities Speakers Bureau as well.
Well, this has been a fantastic episode. I appreciate you, Tom. Just for our listeners, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked you in our previous episode. What does liberty mean to you?
Well, I said FDR, I think, said it best with his four freedoms: freedom from want, freedom from fear, freedom of religion, and freedom of expression.
Fantastic. You summed it
Yeah.
up great.
Mhm.
Appreciate your time, Tom. I look forward to hearing you on the speaker circuit.